So, good morning, fellows. We are in our next bi-weekly, I think we are now, Englebert Crypto podcast. The name's getting shorter week by the week. We'll land on something really punchy, I'm sure, by the year out. So I'm Wayne Green, co-founder of Englebert, and I have with me Charles Swan and Gareth Malner. Charles and Gareth, I'll let you say hello yourselves.
Hello, and as always, I'm Gareth Malner, the other co-founder of Englebert.
And I'm Giles Swan, so I'm the non-executive director for Englebert, and I'm a policy consultant as well.
Thanks, guys. So we thought we'd get Giles involved in this conversation because we had a really interesting one last week in the office, and we're going to drill down a little bit deeper into the question of what is a financial promotion, which sounds like a fairly obvious question to ask and one which we should have the answer to. But I think when we start to discuss in a little bit more detail, we can find that there's some, shall we say, nuance involved in that question that we're coming across fairly frequently. Not least because a financial promotion, or shall we say promotion, means different things to different people. So in a regulatory environment, when the FCA talks about promotion, they probably mean something slightly different to what your marketers or design ad people or salespeople might be thinking of when they talk about a promotion. And the bar's probably set a bit differently for those different groups of people. And what we're concerned with is the regulatory environment. So we'll talk a little bit about what that might mean. And as ever with the podcasts, none of what we say should be taken as official advice from Englebert or taken as read. This is a discussion. And when we work with our clients, we do that on an individual basis and we arrive at answers that we document in evidence on a bespoke, specific basis. So let's have an interesting conversation and see where we land on this fascinating, I'm sure, topic of crypto regulation and financial promotion. So the question that if you want to pick up first, Giles, because you had some interesting views on this distinction, if there is a hard distinction between a promotion in the marketing and sales sense versus the regulatory environment.
Sure, thanks very much, Wayne. And it might seem a bit of an odd question to ask because I think in our sort of day-to-day lives, I think we'd all recognise a sort of advertisement or some marketing, something that's trying to sell us something, tell us how good something is, tell us why we should do something, we shouldn't do something. But in a regulatory context, as you say, we've got to be a bit more precise and sort of defined when we're thinking about what is a financial promotion. Some marketing may fall within that category and some advertisements may, but actually some might not either as well. And, we can get on and talk about things like if we're selling benefits or we're allowing a consumer to sort of buy something now by clicking a link or a button or clicking through on a social media post, sort of how all of those different pieces affect whether it's just a piece of marketing or advertising or actually we need to worry about it from a regulatory perspective because it's a financial promotion. So lots of sort of things to pick up on. I'm not sure which one to pick first, actually.
There's a lot, and I certainly feel like every time we get asked the question, "Is this a promotion?" I feel like I could come up. It depends what side of the bed I've woken up on that day, whether I come down with the answer yes or no. And so, what's really interesting I find about that is that actually it is so loose, if that's one way of putting it. There's not like the word, invitation or inducement has some obvious trigger point. There are some obvious examples where it will always be the case, of course, but there's this morass of grey area that you end up trying to navigate. And so thinking about something like, here's an example that we saw recently, is a retweet of a positive review of your service as a crypto asset service provider a financial promotion? A good starting point too.
I got out on the right-hand side of the bed this morning, as I normally do, and I don't typically get out the other side. So hopefully my advice and thoughts on this were a bit more kind of consistent. I mean, on your tweet question, I guess you'd look at that in the context of if that tweet was written by someone themselves. Is that any different to actually retweeting, a positive or actually a negative review? I suspect you probably want to retweet good things that people are saying about your company or your products or your services rather than bad ones, perhaps. But I mean, a key sort of distinction for me there is what is the content of that? Is that information? Is that a review that someone has given on the one hand, or is it saying, buy Bitcoin because it's amazing and it's going to make you all of this money, and you're retweeting that and saying absolutely sort of it is, and click here to buy now? They're for me the kind of two ends of the spectrum, and I think the latter where you're promoting benefits and saying how much return you're going to get, or this or that, is more than likely that's going to be a promotion for me. A review of a firm's services, that's for me a bit more factual, and an opinion of someone about how a website works or an app works. So I think that's actually a bit easier, given some of the examples we're probably going to get onto as to where I disagree, Wayne, with me on that. Did you get out on the right or the left hand side today? I bet maybe, maybe you got a different.
Yeah,
view.
I got out of the same side, so same view, and I think that's an important point, right? Is that from a regulatory perspective, it's what, if there is a promotional element to it at all, is being promoted, and in this instance, it was talking about the service, not about the assets. There was reference to assets, but only in terms of I transacted in them. The service was great. It wasn't I transacted in them and now my assets are going to go to the moon. You should come to the moon with me, which clearly trips it well over the line into promotional. And that was where we made the distinction between what's a promotion in this regulatory context and what's a sort of a retweet of a positive review of a service, which wasn't given, as you say, the benefits or the upside potentially to a regulated investment. And one thing that I think be interesting to hear from you, Gareth, on this from some of the conversations we've had with firms is in the absence of any specifics, and there are no specifics here, right? Because that would be too difficult. I couldn't imagine the regulator ever being able to write very specific prescriptive rules as to this is in scope, this is not in scope. And so in the absence of that, firms want to try and work out for themselves, as they need to, and so do we, what that actually means in practice. And so things like buy buttons then start to be focused in on, and that's had some implications, Gareth, hasn't it?
Yeah, I think that's right. And so, for the most part, we've always considered that a buy button, by definition, has the word buy written on it normally. And so the word buy often gets construed as a positive instruction or invitation to do the thing. And by clicking the button, you do the thing. You effectively allow the transaction to take place, or you indicate that you want those steps to start to happen. Whatever process you've got to do before you maybe pass KYC, for instance. And so, to my mind, it's always been a pretty straightforward analysis that buy buttons get caught by the rules and are in scope. And yet, it strikes me from recent conversations that there are examples where you might say that's not the case. And that largely depends on what's around that button, and whether what's around it is either a factual statement or educational or nothing at all, frankly, just a button alone on a page.
So
maybe
our
within
start
a widget.
point, yeah, sorry, I was going to say our start point's kind of been that a buy button appearing makes it a financial promotion. So that's where we begin, right? And still is today. But then in that conversation that we had last week, where we started to look at some examples, that started to produce more grey areas. And we're finding, I think, that if firms are too prescriptive in their interpretation of the rules and try to apply these hard thresholds like that, actually they could be giving themselves more to have approved where they don't need to. The important bit, of course, always is that if you make a decision along these lines where it is in the grey, you've got to be really clear about why you think the decision you made is the right one, and make sure that's documented and evidence. That's always a good idea. That's why we put so much effort into our reviews, and we're recording videos of ourselves doing it, so on, explaining why we're coming up with these decisions, so that we've got good records and we can look back on it. But that narrowness that's tried to be created, it's got a buy button, it must be, on the one hand can reduce the scope of what needs to be or doesn't need to be approved when it doesn't need to be. On the other hand, can actually have the opposite effect of taking your eyes off other things that need to actually be focused on a little bit more. So that's how we sort of got into this conversation. Giles, you had some good points to mention on this buy button scenario, and some sort of scenarios where perhaps it's not quite so clear cut as has been applied to date.
Yeah, thanks, Wayne. I think there were a few things to say on this, and the regime actually is nearly coming up for its 25th birthday. It was created in 2000 initially. Back in those days, we didn't really have the internet. We had cold calling. When people used to phone you up on things like a landline phone. I mean, who has got one of those operational now? Not many people. And an old-fashioned kind of advertising. And actually, when this was created in 2020, that was 2000. That was the sort of nexus for the regime. I think there's a couple of things to say on how to think about this. Firstly, the Treasury, even 24 years ago, was very clear that they're looking to capture really communications with a promotional element. So for me, that is a core sort of first test. But also, the FCA has published a lot of guidance around sort of balance and thinking about, what is the substantive elements of a promotion. And they've been very clear that where you just have, information or education, so you've got, description of, let's say, a crypto asset, a factual description about the asset or about the blockchain or the protocol, whatever it may be, that's not promotional in nature, that piece of information or education. It's really where that's balanced alongside something that then causes you maybe to take action off the back of reading that information, and particularly where maybe a view is being taken as to the benefits or the merits of that. So, we often sort of have this extreme scenario of would a white web page just with a buy now button in the middle, is that a financial promotion? There's no information at all on that page other than kind of click here. And certainly if you then clicked through and had to enter lots of details in and read different things, I think then we're very squarely into promotion territory with all of the the requirements around that. How does that analysis work where you have just information on a page with no kind of promotion of benefits, but you still have the buy now button? Does that change the analysis? And then where you have, I think, quite clear promotional elements, singing the praises of a particular asset or a particular service, and then a big flashing button with big flashing lights saying "click here." That for me is the sort of spectrum of analysis, and that is all about, as you say, what else is around that potential inducement or invitation. The buy button being, I think, the invitation in this instance quite clearly, but are you being incited or induced? And all of these sort of concepts are things that I think the Treasury, even 25 years ago, was thinking about. It's probably a bit easier those days, because if someone phoned you up and said, buy this bit of car insurance or whatever it may be, I don't think anyone would be disputing that's a promotional or kind of sales call. It's a little bit more difficult now because of the the range of different media that we have, and how do you adapt and make sure the regime sort of works for all of those different media. Gareth, you're nodding, which I'm pleased about, because it suggests you don't disagree with me. But
it's not that I don't disagree. I definitely don't disagree. I have lived, 10 years as a lawyer in the grey and the nuance, and people always want specific examples of this is in and this is out, and even examples broadly similar, you would likely, if you took them through the court process, end up with different outcomes. Which is why I come back to my original comment about it depends sort of what side of the bed you've woken up on and which side you're prepared to stick your mast in the floor on and stand behind and say, this is the position we've taken. So here's a classic, let's look at an example that we haven't talked about. You've got a buy button on an otherwise it's pretend it's a blank page or it's just educational in nature. But what happens when you click that buy button is that you get taken to a page where there are then 3 options to buy from different people. Go here to buy from this person, go here to buy from this person, go here to buy from this person. At what point does it start to become a promotion? And whose promotion is it? Is always something worth trying to work through. Because all you're doing really is, as the provider of the blank buy button, sort of, if you want to use the regulatory language, making an arrangement to allow someone to go off and do something somewhere else. So have you promoted those things or have you not? Is it the referrers or the referees promotion at the point that you're on a page with the 3 options, 1 for each of them? And that becomes quite a nuanced thing. And again, I'm also reminded of the example the other day where it was a retweet of the service, a positive review of a service. But when you start to talk about the elements of the service as well, so, hey, I managed to do this with this provider and it was great and it was fast and it was cheap. Is fast and cheap suddenly starting to be more promotional in nature? Or is it again a statement of fact that they were things that happened and objectively true? So again, that decision as to whether something is a promotion or not, in that context still, for me, doesn't have an obvious answer that one just comes out with and says definitively, yes, that's no promotional or that's not. And there's so much of that grey in this. And I think the FCA recognise that, right? Their guidance even says, in terms of what inducement and invitation mean, it's natural definitions, can capture a whole range of activities. Inducement is slightly broader than invitation, but to the extent, have you been induced, have you been invited to do something, tends to be the sort of baseline test. But how that works in an online world, to me, has way more nuance than probably is helpful. And I'm not saying that means the regulation is wrong or the guidance is wrong, but that the world we operate in is inherently complex and doesn't help where you're providing a service like ours and clients are asking, is this or that or the other a promotion? Or more often is the case, wanting pre-written guidance from us on what the guide rails are, what they can and can't and should and shouldn't do. And the reality is you could just never provide that comprehensively because it will always depend on the language used in that particular instance. You could even change one word in that content and it fundamentally changes the analysis. So it's very hard to do that kind of thing, I would say.
I'd agree with all of that, Gareth. And the FCA have put a lot of effort in, I think, particularly on the social media side, in thinking through, and indeed they put out some quite extensive guidance on this a few months ago in thinking through some of those elements. 2 things I pick up on what you said. Firstly, we have this sort of overarching requirement to be clear, fair, and not misleading in the communications, and a big part of that is really being able to justify or substantiate things you say. So you can say you're the best and you're brilliant and the fastest and whatever it may be, and that may well be absolutely true. As long as you can substantiate that, you've got some sort of evidence to back that up. And coming back on this point around the promotional element, I think this sort of objective test, certainly that the FCA has set out, is the intention of this really to persuade or sort of incite someone to invest, to buy crypto assets, and what is the intention? And if the intention is to provide information, then it's probably more unlikely that you're really trying to persuade someone to do something. It is more, are there flashing green lights on a tweet saying this is the tweet you should look at, and this particularly is the sentence, and we are down to single words. I think shifting for me whether a communication is a promotion or clearly isn't, and those words generally are going to be statements that are positive or are predicting some benefit or result sort of in the future, like a return or whatever it may be that you're then saying to the reader of that communication, this is why you should take action now to benefit from something sort of in the future. So that for me is the kind of analysis to apply as you're thinking through, particularly on the social media side, where the amount of words and letters is so constrained, and every word or letter actually has such such a significant effect on turning on that analysis one way or the other.
That's where I think we've got to then sort of row ourselves back from this very complicated set of regulations and the interpretation of it as a firm that's living it day to day, and then sort of firstly look at what the intent is of the firm, as you said, Giles. So what was I trying to achieve by doing this? Honestly, what was I trying to achieve? Was I trying to educate people? Was I trying to help make it easy to interact to people that already know and want to do this and have made an informed decision? Or am I trying to garner interest and create interest in something so that they will go ahead? And that's the first bit. And the second bit, the most important bit probably, is very difficult for us to do. But if you were a customer potentially and you didn't know about all of these rules and regulations, what would you make of that communication as it popped up in front of you? How would you react to that? If it were, never mind if it were a crypto asset, what if it was a car or insurance product or a tube of toothpaste or anything like that? What's it there trying to do? Is it trying to get me to come in and take enough interest that I actually am compelled or induced to go and buy it? That's, I think, the important bit. That's where that coming back to that buy button point. That's where I think we can get some a little bit more clarity. Is if I were just a non-technical, non-regulatory, experienced and qualified person, and I just saw a buy button on its own, is that going to maybe do something? It's probably not, because either I don't know what it is, because it's not giving me any other context or anything, or it's telling me what it is for me to then decide if I want to go and do something about it when I do see something that says you should do it with us, or you should buy this one, or here's the benefits of that one. And I think that's kind of the important bit, is to row back to the start again and say, forget the nuance and the specifics and the text of the rules and the laws for a second, and just think what a customer might think when they're going through that, and what effect would it have on them. And that's where it starts to get a little bit more clearer. And then you marry the two together. Have we taken the right decision? Does it now match what the rules and the guidance are saying? When you put the two in one piece, which is not an easy answer, obviously, but that's the point, right? The more you want to do, and the more you want to talk about the services and the products and educate people and stuff like that, the more coverage you want to get, and the more people you want to reach in different ways, the more work there is going to be involved in evidencing that and making that decision. But once you've made it and you've written it down and documented, said this is why I think this is fine, and you're truly comfortable with it, you've not just tried to reverse engineer the rationale so it meets what you want the answer to be. You've done a proper assessment. That's kind of done then, until you start to hear or learn otherwise, that actually this is not having the effect I thought it would. It's more promotional, less promotional, whatever. And then you can go back and revisit it. I think if you agree, Giles, that's sort of how the regulator would like us to think about it and approach it. And even if we don't land on exactly what perhaps they were thinking in that context, at least if you've made the decisions for the right reasons and you've got evidence for it and you're able to react, and it's not a significant margin away from the expectation, then that's likely to be acceptable.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, Wayne, and I'd add one other point, which is we've talked up to now about assessing sort of individual communication. So is this web page a financial promotion? Is this tweet a financial promotion, etc.? I think the other component to that is what's the sort of journey been up to that point, and what is the journey sort of post that point? Because as you say, if we just had a white web page with buy ETH on it, well, that a consumer arriving at that page may not know what ETH is, so they can click the button and then be taken through a sort of process. It's very different to me. For me, compared to a situation where they can't get to that page without having gone through another web page that sings the benefits of ETH. And so I agree with you in terms of the sort of analysis on the inducement and the assignment, but it's not just that single communication that I think we should be focusing on, and that I guess is also the point that again the FCA just assessing that web page in isolation. Rather than looking at the sort of consumer journey, which I know is certainly something that you and Gareth work with clients on, in sort of thinking through how that journey looks, what are the different purposes of the different stages of that journey. Some elements of that may not be promotional; they may just be information. But other elements may well be, as we've talked about, singing the benefits or the praises of a particular product and service, and therefore sort of be very promotional in nature.
And that's where this gap, I guess, between the regime coming in 20 odd years ago and what exists today is the biggest problem, because the way that those journeys happen and evolve is not like it was when it first came out. So you're right, when you used to get something pushed to the letterbox and it had a tear off slip at the bottom, you filled your details in and wrote a check and put it in the post. That's the inducement, that's the promotion. It's a direct offer and it's going to make you do something. But what didn't happen was you'd get a leaflet pushed to the letterbox that was brand awareness, and then the postman had come back 2 minutes later and pushed another leaflet through that told you a little bit of educational material, and another leaflet that said, by the way, here's the web link for you to go and do something. And then there's a website, and that's just not built with that in mind. But that's what it looks like now for an online journey. You've got the tweet, the Instagram post, the website, etc., all sort of interacting with each other to make something happen, and we're trying to apply some very non specific rules in respect of online interactions to what is a almost entirely, if not entirely, online journey.
And it doesn't have to be always online, right? Because you could start offline. I mean, let's say you happen to brand an entire tube station in your livery, and you try to do so in a way that meets the image advertising rules, so that you're only saying, here's our logo, here's our name, and here's a description of the regulated activities we do, full stop. Now you've got awareness of the brand. Now someone's going to go off and do some digging into that, and they'll see your tweets, and then they'll see your website, and then they'll see the buy button, and then they'll decide to transact. So that whole thing starts much, much earlier now than probably it did historically. Maybe I suppose the biggest analogy would be to like word of mouth in the street. Like, your Auntie Mabel would tell you that she just spoke to this really great stockbroker, for instance. So, something like that's probably an interesting example of how the rules as they were conceived don't marry up with sort of how marketing works. But also how marketing works is probably constantly under refinement, and we see that with the marketing teams across our different clients. They all do things very differently, and it is possible, I would say, and most people probably don't think this is true, but it is possible to create purely educational content that still ultimately promotes your brand as being someone who is on the pulse of what's going on, and able to, as a result of having that finger on the pulse, provide a service that is good and should be, used by you. We see.
That's an interesting point, actually, because you reminded me of something that came up when we were holding interviews last week, and we were speaking to a recent graduate, Giles, weren't we? And she was saying that she'd looked at some websites in this space and pulled one out in particular. I won't name, but she liked it. Because she said that it seemed very credible and it was very informative and it explained things well, and so that's building a good image. It's building good brand value by showing credibility and by communicating well with people in a way that they understand. But that actually wasn't promotional. It was just, here's who we are in factual terms, without all of this, safest, securest, fastest, cheapest. And then what this whole crypto thing is all about, explained it very nicely. So they were now informed, but they weren't being induced to buy it. They were just being told what it all is and what it all means. The next bit you click on might then be the more promotional stuff. That's what you want to be able to look at.
So but all of that is still content that's getting pushed effectively by that marketing team or marketing teams to incite trust and familiarity, so that when it comes time to actually sell you something, you're ready to roll. And it has effect. It is effective as a strategy, and probably a lot of projects in this space tend not to do that. They go for the hard and fast, we are the best, we're going to move, we're going to make you rich overnight strategy, without that sort of approach just doesn't work anymore under the rules. It could work on a global scale, but under these rules in particular, saying that without the balance would mean you would be promoting illegally, or certainly in a non-compliant way. And so having to work within the rules, like you say a lot, Wayne, anyone can market something. It's harder to market something within a set of parameters that restrict what you can do, and that's where you find the truly talented people shine.
Yeah, exactly. If you could promote something and just say whatever you want, and no one's ever going to fact check it, and there's no credibility behind it, and it's all just made up stuff. Thankfully, we don't see that coming to us. But if someone can do that, well, you can sell anything. That's like the real old days of sales, when you just say whatever it is that gets someone to sign the dotted line. Anyone can do that. It's actually quite easy. That's just persuasion without anything behind it. Being really good at promoting this stuff within the framework the rules provide, that's when you find out the skill involved and what really good marketing looks like.
I think one of the FCA's intentions, and I think this is actually just a good business practice anyway, and actually has a lot of commercial advantage, is to really increase the amount of information and educational material out there so that investors can take informed decisions. And this isn't actually about clear, fair, and not misleading. This is more about making sure the content and the information is accurate. Clear, fair, and not misleading is more around the sort of claims, as we're talking about, that you're going to be making in the context of a promotion. So the FCA is very actively trying to make sure that the way in which firms are thinking about this and projects are thinking about this actually does facilitate that information and the education almost before the consumer then gets to the promotional bit and is within all of the clear, fair, not misleading, and all of the other pieces of the regime. So that's that's certainly something I think we're all thinking about, how to achieve that balance. And the worst possible outcome is that the way in which this regime is implemented reduces the amount of education and informational material out there. That would be a really sort of bad outcome from, I think, the FCA's perspective, but also from firms' perspective in misaligning expectations in terms of users for what they're actually getting from a firm.
Yeah, and I think there's a real over-reliance on centralized descriptions of assets. Everyone's pulling in their descriptions via an API from some centralized listing provider. We all know the main ones out there, and often they might tell you great things about who the founders are and what the project's all about. They don't actually tell you what the asset does, and that's fine in the context of shares, where shares are shares and shares are shares, except for what the company does that differs, and that's important in that context. But in the context of crypto, what the token itself does is radically different fundamentally between projects, and without telling people that, you are fundamentally failing to communicate the essence of what they're buying, I often think.
So, chaps, how do we summarize this? If I give it a go, because we've sort of talked a lot about the fact that nuance exists, right, and that there isn't prescriptive rules, and that as a result, firms are trying to apply prescription themselves, but then as a negative consequence of that, focused too much on certain very small aspects of it, and sort of lost sometimes some of the bigger picture, and in some ways reduced what they're able to do rather than expanded what they're able to do, because that's just naturally what happens when you try and narrow the scope of application. And so for me, my sense is that we still need to look piece by piece at that particular promotion, what the client of ours or whoever is doing, what the journey looks like, what the intention is, what behaviours it might induce. Trying to think of a different word to induce there, but I can't think of one. So what behaviours it's trying to create as a result. So we've still got to do that analysis, And we can't come up necessarily with one piece of paper that says, here's what you can and can't do step by step. But what we will do and what we are able to do is to apply some of that thinking a little bit more bespoke, and to come up with an answer that isn't necessarily as clear cut or as assumed at the outset, as happens when you try and say buy button means promotion, and that there is opportunity to discuss it. But the big thing is, what does it look like to a customer, and have I made this decision for the right reasons, and have I got evidence of that, why I've done it, documented it, recorded it, and am I still comfortable? Could I sit in front of the regulator and say, this is why I did it, and feel like I'm being genuine because that's what I want to be, not that I'm trying to pull the wool over someone's eyes because that's what I wanted the answer to be.
And I find that, hilariously, the people who find that thought exercise of, could I sit in front of the regulator and say that, have their minds much more sharply focused, having actually sat in front of the regulator and tried to stand behind what they've said. It can sometimes feel like a soggy stick to try and beat someone with until the experience actually happens, and that fundamentally changes, I think, behaviours of people that we deal with. So I think that's a good thing. But equally, for those people who haven't yet had that experience, it is about really taking that logical train seriously, because it could be, you sat there trying to actually justify the position you've taken, and if you don't have recorded minutes, if you don't have notes as to why you thought something or why you did something, it didn't happen, and that's about as bad a position as it's possible to be in, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Giles, last word from you.
I think my takeaway is probably, surely there's an inherent contradiction between us saying, don't focus too much on the buy button, don't use that as the determinant as to whether something's a promotion or not, and then we also say to you, by the way, you can change one word in a communication, and that will completely alter the analysis from being a promotion to the other. You'd think there's a sort of contradiction of terms in that. My kind of response to that is, don't focus just on the buy button. Don't focus on a specific word, but kind of take the promotion in context, and also not just the communication in context, but the build up to that from a consumer journey point of view. Regulation is often viewed by people as being the thing that stops you from doing things. I've turned that on its head and say, what are the things you can do effectively, like education and information, that's going to get a better business result for you when the consumer ends up in that promotional bit of the journey.
Yeah. Cool. That was interesting. Thanks, guys. Until we get our next fortnightly podcast underway, and we'll see what it's called this time in 2 weeks.
I can't wait. Thank you, Giles.
Thank you very much, guys. Thanks.
Thanks, Giles.
Thank you.